Well, 4 months ago here on Redacted, we broke the story that the United States had ordered depleted uranium shells for use in Abrams tanks. These are the Abrams tanks that were then to be sent off to Ukraine. So put two and two together there, right? Depleted uranium shells in Abrams tanks for use on the battlefield in Ukraine against Russian soldiers. Dan Cohen was first to bring us that story here on Redacted. But this morning, the Wall Street Journal is out with a cover story that exclusive. The Wall Street Journal has learned and confirmed that, yes, the United States is authorizing the use of depleted uranium shells to Ukraine. I guess they didn't watch Redacted 4 months ago when we had that story first. But now that it's in the Wall Street Journal, Dan, I guess it's official. They got the story 4 months after us. So what's going on here?
Yeah, well, the Wall Street Journal is calling its story an exclusive, that the reporters are breaking the story from their sources inside the U.S. government, inside the Pentagon, inside the White House. And, that's the very definition of access journalism. What we did is looked at publicly available documents in the government register that showed that the United States government, that the Pentagon had ordered multiple shipments of depleted uranium shells for use specifically in Abrams tanks, first in October and then in December. And it wasn't until January 25th that the Biden administration announced that it was sending those Abrams tanks to Ukraine, and it portrayed it as the process of recent deliberations. But the fact that these were ordered in October and December, months ahead of time, suggested to me that this was actually a calculated decision that had been planned long ahead of time and was just being made public at that point. And so that's what we reported at the time. We showed the contracts, the documents that were publicly available, and the Wall Street Journal, as all other mainstream media, ignored the story completely. So we had the exclusive at that point. I collaborated with the Bulgarian journalist Dilyana Gaitancheva on the story, and she published the story in Bulgarian. Obviously, I broke it in English. And what's remarkable, Clayton, is that when Dilyana published her story on Facebook, because in Bulgaria, Facebook is the main social media outlet that people use, the platform people use, Facebook actually marked her story as fake news. And she was forced to delete her post in order to not have her account suspended, even though, of course, it was entirely true. So now that the Wall Street Journal reports it, well, now I guess it's not fake news anymore. So, just remarkable to see how this works.
Yeah, I wonder if she'll be able to post it in Bulgaria. Here's the Wall Street Journal, and see if they'll flag it as fake news. It's amazing how the access journalists can turn something into, I guess now it's real news. It's no longer fake anymore. So I'm curious, what do you think changed here? Because this was all publicly available. The White House was denying that this was the case. Government officials were denying that this was going to happen, and yet it was all there in the documentation. What do you think changed?
Well, one of the things that I wonder is if this has to do with the stalling, sort of failing counteroffensive that the Ukrainians have supposedly launched, though has not had any real successes and has been delayed since into the spring. I mean, the beginning of the spring is when they were supposed to launch it. Now the media is calling it it went from spring offensive to spring summer counteroffensive. So I wonder if, now the U.S. saying we're going to send more weapons in order to ensure that we inflict maximum damage on Russia, but really on Ukrainian soil, to basically poison the land so that, the Donbass is in the worst possible condition for when the inevitable, at some point, there's going to be an agreement. I mean, I hope it's soon, who knows when, but then it does maximum damage because, as we all know, depleted uranium leaves toxins that will fester for generations on there's all kinds of deformities on babies and birth defects.
Yeah, awful. Awful. Yeah.
Exactly. That will be there for multiple generations.
And Putin's called this out because the British Defense Minister of Defense was very open about it. and said, yeah, we are going to be sending depleted uranium shells. And we saw them on camera. We featured that here on Redacted, showing those depleted uranium shells in Britain as part of the tank training that the British government was providing to Ukrainian tank operators. So they were there. We could see them clearly. And the defense ministry for the British government was clearly saying that they were sending them. So it seemed weird that the United States was denying that we were also sending them. But they were very public about it, and Putin called them out about it, did he not?
Yeah, he did. The Russians have made very clear that this is a red line for them. They know about what depleted uranium does. They, of course, are very aware of how the United States used it in Kosovo and in Bosnia in the 1990s. In Iraq, in both invasions in 1991 and in 2003. And of course, in Syria, the U.S. used it in Syria in 2015, despite its promises that it would not. So the Russians are very clear about what this actually means, what depleted uranium does. The Wall Street Journal article, on the other hand, is very it's mostly the thrust of the article is about how effective they are in stopping Russians. The Wall Street Journal article quotes a Rand Corporation analyst, and Rand Corporation is funded by the military, so not exactly neutral here. And this analyst says the projectile hits like a freight train. It's very long and very dense, so it puts a great deal of kinetic energy on a specific point and an enemy armor array. So not the only. So, this stuff is great, according to the Wall Street Journal. It only briefly mentions the environmental impact and says that it's been debated at the White House, where officials have expressed concern that sending the rounds might open Washington to criticism that it was providing a weapon that may carry health and environmental risks. And it mentions a UN environmental program report that talks about the metals chemical toxicity, that saying that it can cause skin irritation, kidney failure, and increase the risks of cancer. So the Wall Street Journal, of course, doesn't talk about any of the history of the U.S. using that, as I mentioned, in Bosnia, right, Kosovo, Syria, Iraq, or doesn't really get into any kind of details about these horrific effects that anybody can Google. We're not going to show here because we don't want to be censored. But the images, if you just Google depleted uranium Iraq or Yugoslavia, Kosovo, it's horrible. So that is totally glossed over by the Wall Street Journal.
Well, they do make mention in this Wall Street Journal piece. Top Biden administration officials say the U.S. goal is to enable Ukraine to make as much progress as possible on the battlefield. So what does that mean exactly? To reclaim land. We know that Zelensky in the past week has said Crimea is the goal, to retake Crimea, to retake former Eastern Ukraine, now Russia, the Donbass region. So you basically will have an area, the most fertile soil in the world, littered with cancer-causing agents. So is that the goal? To retake this land from ethnic Russians, destroy those people, and lay waste to the land on top of it? I would love for someone to ask that of Corinne Jean-Pierre at the White House press briefing, but that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, I would love to see what she has to say about it, or John Kirby. It would be great if somebody did that. But and since we reported on that depleted uranium, the Pentagon actually in May issued another tender for more depleted uranium munitions. These ones are 50 millimeter. They're called armor-piercing, fin-stabilized, discarding sabot with trace. And these are to be used in 50 millimeter XM913 weapon systems, which is a huge gun mounted on top of the Bradley fighting vehicles that the U.S. sent to Ukraine. The U.S. sent 60 of those to Ukraine in January as part of a weapons package. So it's not just these Abrams tanks that are going to be firing depleted uranium. It's also going to be on these Bradley vehicles.
Yeah, we did hear from John Kirby at least a little bit on this. Let me just circle back here. Most of these tanks, most of these Bradley fighting vehicles are being destroyed. So it's unclear exactly what's happening then to these shells. Are they winding up on the black market? Are they being destroyed? We've seen a whole laundry list of destruction of these Bradley fighting vehicles and other armored personnel vehicles over the past 48 hours as this counteroffensive has unfolded. John Kirby, though, said this kind of ammunition is fairly commonplace, he says. And it really just kind of downplays any of the studies about radioactivity and radioactive threat. It's like, this is fairly commonplace. Commonplace? No, these are not commonplace weapons.
Yeah, it's incredible. There's no pushback clearly from these reporters on John Kirby's comments. I mean, this is where it comes down to somebody going to one of these press conferences and holding them to it and asking them about the history of this use and pushing back against this whitewash and not allowing it to happen. But the White House press corps, saying that go to the Pentagon briefings, they're all mouthpieces for they have working relationships. These are the very access journalists that produce these kind of reports, and basically don't credit the journalists who break the story and then pretend it's their own.
Also, they make mention of these cluster munitions and whether or not to supply cluster munitions to Ukraine. This seemed like a red line for a lot of people. Like, how are you going to do this? The indiscriminate killing of civilians with cluster munitions. There's a lot of collateral damage with cluster munitions. And there appears to be sort of an open debate in this Wall Street Journal piece about, should we or shouldn't we? We're not really sure about where we stand on sending cluster munitions to Ukraine on top of all of this. And what's next?
Right.
Nukes?
Right. And cluster, I mean, that was actually recently proposed, sending so-called tactical nuclear weapons to Ukraine. And then, of course, when you open Pandora's box with nuclear weapons, of course, you know where that leads. I mean, many people have said there's no such thing as tactical nuclear weapons, like for small use on the battlefield. I mean, once that cat is out of the bag, then all bets are off. And then you have, a possible full-on exchange of nuclear weapons. But cluster munitions are extremely dangerous. I mean, those are horrible for civilians. They spread all kinds of tiny explosives all over the place that are apparently very effective at killing a lot of soldiers at one time. But the ones that don't explode that are left there, well, those kids playing in the area, any civilians around in the area who might come across them can be injured or killed if those explode. So again, it's just destruction, poisoning of the land, and the civilian population pays the price. And the U.S. is supposedly protecting Ukraine against this Russian invasion, but is doing everything possible to sacrifice Ukraine and poison the land with depleted uranium, and maybe we're even going to see these cluster munitions.
Well, I'm sure glad that the Wall Street Journal broke this story. It's great reporting from the Wall Street Journal once again.
Yeah, I said something on Twitter to those guys. I responded to the Wall Street Journal and tagged the journalists Michael Gordon and let me get the name of the other one.
Gordon Lubold. Gordon Lubold
yes,
at
there
the Wall
you go.
Street Journal. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see if was an honest mistake or they just going to ignore it and pretend that the story was actually an exclusive. We'll have to see.
We'll see if they issue a correction. I would love to see that. Dan Cohen, thank you so much. A reminder to all of you, the first person and the first team to bring you this story on these depleted uranium shells. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Clayton.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.